Tim, a very hearty welcome, and we're excited to have you on. But in the interest of full disclosure, we did actually have Andrew Hastie invited and booked to be our guest this week. He pulled out a few days ago saying that he sort of didn't want to draw too much attention to himself with a long-form interview. I guess he wanted to keep low profile after having a very high profile for a few weeks there. Just tell our listeners, what do you make of Hastie's departure and the very evident conflict that's playing out within the Liberal Party at the moment?
So you're saying I'm the Stephen Bradbury of this interview?
Look, we're saying you're a very, very adequate and welcome substitute.
Well, I'll take that as a compliment. Thank you. Obviously what's happened in the past couple of weeks is Andrew's decided to step back from the front bench. Most people chomp at the bits to get on the front bench when they're in Parliament. He's chosen to voluntarily take a step back. On his words, he said it's over an issue around his carriage over immigration as part of the Home Affairs portfolio. But really, I think it's fair to say what Andrew's done is he's gone out and said he has a bigger agenda that he wants to prosecute and doesn't want to be bound by shadow cabinet solidarity, which is, broadly the principle that if you're a member of the shadow cabinet, if it makes a decision that you have to back that in. That's the same on Liberal and Labor sides, because if you want people to support what you're going to do, you have to support others in what they're going to do. And he just wants to be unshackled by that and go and say what he wants. So now we're all waiting with patient breath to see what it is that he wants to say.
And how's that gone down internally within the party? I mean, do you see that as a noble move, that he's done the right thing by his colleagues? Because he could have done it in a little sort of quieter way or in a more gracious way, couldn't he?
Mary Aldred made that point in party room, right? This wasn't a thing that she respected in terms of the way he went about it. Do you share that view?
I think I think what's become evident to me is that he probably shouldn't have joined shadow cabinet in the first place, because I think this has been going on for longer than just the past couple of weeks. And I don't say that as a criticism. When I got elected on the 3rd of June, because the election was May 3, but I wasn't actually declared till 3 June, I didn't automatically jump at the idea of going into the shadow cabinet myself, because you have to go through a process, particularly after a feat like that, of what's your role and what contribution do you have to make and what's the direction of the party. And, it took a while for me to be convinced to go into the shadow cabinet, and that was the best way to prosecute arguments. But the truth is also, at this time, the party needs every hand on deck, I think, to sort of pick itself up and give people a sense of hope for the future. And that's the approach I've taken. So Andrew's gone off and made his decision. The question now is, what is he actually going to put forward that he wants to prosecute? Because really the approach he's taken is to say, well, I'm going to go outside of the normal party processes. He's now got to develop something which he's now going to try and essentially remake the priorities of the entire party on. That's a very substantial move, and it's one that's fraught with difficulty, because there's the world you want, there's the world that we live in, and I always start with the world we live in and how do we then take that world towards a more liberal vision, rather than starting from the world I want and trying to get reality to conform to it.
Just on your Stephen Bradbury point, even if you did Stephen Bradbury on, our last two guests, as we said just before the show, were the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, so you're still an esteemed company. So thanks for coming on.
My ego can handle it.
Yeah, don't get too big. You and him have an interesting career trajectory, and kind of you relate to each other in an interesting way. Came in at almost the exact same time.
He came in 2015 in a by-election. I came in 2016, yeah.
Similarly big ambitions the two of you have. I think it's fair to say, without you going into that, I don't need you to address that. But you've been put forward by some commentators as a kind of person who embodies the vision on the moderate side of the party, one path for the party, him on the other flank. He's also a bit of a lone wolf. He's not from the East Coast, doesn't have the same connections as someone like you who's been institutionalised in the party for a long time. How do you relate to him at a personal level, and also what do you make of him as a character in the party? How do you locate him? What's he like?
Well, so when I was first elected in 2016, Andrew and I were sat next to each other in Parliament, and we made a conscious choice, and I don't want to sort of break confidences, and I don't think I am, but we made a very conscious choice that we were likely to be in Parliament for a long time together. Obviously, I had a 3-year walkabout, whereas he did not. to get along, and I have very warm affection for him personally, and I do, and we've at different points traded books and challenged our own ideas, and I've given his kids Christmas presents and those sorts of things. So we've actually always had a very warm relationship, and he's a warm person, but he has, a very different background to what I do. He's very security focused because of his background, obviously, in the SAS. I'm much more academic. He's studied things like business economics more recently. And so we come at issues from different perspectives, but we actually have a lot of common ground as well. We're both very focused on national unity, what it is we need to build out for the future of Australia. I'm probably a bit more retail in my politics. He's probably a bit more, how would you put it, romantic, I think it would be fair to say. So I think we actually have a really interesting complementarity between the two of us. We sometimes end up in the same place with very different views, but of course there have been debates in the past where we unintentionally led to a nationwide boycott of Cooper's beer because we talked about the issue of same-sex marriage over a beer where we both had diametrically opposite views. And so I think we're an interesting pair in that sense because on a lot of issues we genuinely do end up in the same place. But, he's talking about reindustrialisation. If you go and look at my campaign launch speech back on the 29th of March of this year, I explicitly talk about reindustrialising the country. He said it sort of subsequently, and that's not to take ownership of it. We actually have very similar views about what we need to do to build the strength of this country, why it matters, how we're going to do it. But again, how do we best prosecute that?
So what you're describing there is basically a platonic ideal of, the conservative wing of the Liberal Party and the moderate wing, or whatever it is that you call your sort of wing of the Liberal Party, disagreeing respectfully, having dialogue across the table. But that is not at all the public front of the Liberal Party the last few weeks in particular. What the public is seeing is division, infighting, leaking. Jacinta Napigipa-Price, this week has called your party, her party, a clown show, or said it's resembled a clown show. I'm not saying any of those things are true, but that is the public perception. And I just would like you to sort of explain to listeners what you guys are fighting about. What is the existential war that's happening here? Because, the sensible policy points are maybe net zero and immigration. Is that what it's really about, or is it something deeper about the soul of the party?
I actually think it's a much bigger conversation about the soul of the country, actually.
Wow, okay.
And that's why I want to emphasise the points of commonality rather than the points of difference, because I think what we've had is we've gone through a period of 30 years where of peace and prosperity, where as a nation we've taken a lot of comfort from things like post-Cold War, global economic integration. We've basically extracted our security dividend as a society. We've lived in a period of incredible prosperity. And in many ways, it's been, of course, a period where we've been able to focus on how do we perfect our society, address historical disadvantage and injustices. We haven't perfected everything. But now we're going back to a time where we need to focus on the majority again because we need to kind of secure the nation. And that's partly, I think, what's motivating some of the things that Andrew and others are doing. And so, but the challenge in politics is always how do you take people with you on that journey? Because the public, I think, are looking at our times. They're anxious economically, I think in a security sense, and they're anxious, but they want to be led through those times, but they want a sense of hope and vision for the future. They don't want to be led through fear. And I think what we need to position towards is a vision that's focused on hope about how we can be the trusted partner to walk alongside Australians.
Is it just an issue of style, though, and messaging, as you're saying, or are there fundamental kind of policy issues or ideological issues and fissures that just can't be mended?
There absolutely are other issues. I'm not trying to pretend otherwise, but I do think they can be mended. I think the risk is that we get caught taking the bait of our opponents.
Which is?
Well, I think net zero is a classic example of this. Labor wants us to be debating this issue. The Greens want us to be debating this issue. The Teals want us to be debating this issue.
You're fulfilling their wishes nicely, aren't you?
Well, I can assure you I am not, but others are.
You want to keep net zero, right?
So, in
some way, shape or form.
What I want to have a debate about how we keep net zero price increases, net zero outages, and also, of course, the trade-off from that is, I don't really mind if we get net zero emissions as part of that, but you've got to get the hierarchy right. The problem at the moment is the government is put net zero emissions above price considerations, national security, everything else. Now, I'm not trying to run lines. That's actually structurally a problem.
Keep the net zero commitment.
But happily keep the
with
commitment.
Greater emphasis on other priorities.
So long as we keep it on a more even keel.
Well, hang on, that's not really necessarily keeping the commitment as a first-order priority. You're saying that that's the government's first-order priority at the expense of
everything else. And what I'm saying is it should be on an even keel with other issues and priorities, because when we committed to net zero in 2021, emissions were on the same level as price, reliability, national security, sovereignty. What Labor did was they legislated the target and put it above all of those other considerations, and that's part of the reason why there's a problem.
But Tim, you're an intelligent person and you've read a lot about this stuff. I don't think anyone can credibly say that a move to a net zero emissions policy is not going to cost anyone any money, nor is the alternative of not moving to net zero emissions not going to cost anyone any money. It's going to cost us either way.
Well, there's definitely consequences either way. The idea that if you just scrap net zero, we're suddenly going to have cheaper prices. When people email me, because we deal with this every day, where people email and say, scrap net zero. And you can get this very abrupt email, and I always reply back and say, what do you think will happen if we do it? And people sort of say, well, prices will come down. And I say, well, how? Because inevitably what they think is, well, suddenly new coal-fired power stations will pop up, the price of energy will collapse, et cetera. And it's like, no, that's not going to happen. And you step through why that won't happen. Because this is a problem that's been 20 years in the making. It's a problem about multi-decade investment around baseload energy generation, which is where we're now getting into a very dry topic, but it's one that I'm very interested in. but I'm aware of how dry it is. And if it's multi-decades in the making, it's going to take a while to turn around. But you can still disagree with what the government's doing. I think what the government's doing is reckless, and they're not setting the country best up for the future, which is one of the reasons I've always been very supportive of nuclear. But that will take time too. I'm not arguing with that. So, but what we need to be doing is focused on what do we need to do to get more energy into the grid, to get prices down, because if you get prices down, public acceptance and social licence around emissions reduction will actually improve. But the more prices go up, the more support for emissions reduction goes down, and that's actually why the government's got the priorities wrong. That's
actually a really good point.
Do you reckon you'll lose your seat if you drop net zero entirely? If you went down the Hastie route, you couldn't win Goldstein, right?
I don't agree with that, but I don't. But equally, I think that's a massive hypothetical because I don't think we're going to. I think where we're going to end up is we're going to end up with a policy framework which is focused on back to where we were, which is a much better sense of balance, which still very much contrasts with Labor's position. But, those are things that I'll have to deal with in one sense because Andrew's obviously one of the key persons who stood up and made their case against it, has stepped out. He's free to say whatever he wants and then cabinets or shadow cabinets welcome to bind a policy position.
Are you being a little bit sort of willfully naive there, though, to think that opposition to net zero is just going to magically fall away if you guys get the arguments right?
No, not at all. But I think everything's energy, and I don't mean in the energy debate, I mean in politics. People's energy, people want to fight for something. They want to fight for the future of the country. And we need to channel their energy and give them pathways to do so. And that's in part what's building up at the moment is people are very disappointed with the election result. Fair enough, I am too. They want a pathway forward where they can fight for people to improve the country, and we need to provide the outlets for them to do so. What's happening is there's a whole bunch of people in the media saying, well, the way to do that is to scrap net zero. So they're going, okay, fine, we'll pile in behind that. We need to find other channels and avenues to pursue that conversation.
Just on the path forward and back to the avenue that Andrew Hastie's charting for you guys, it feels like what you're saying is that both sides of the party agree that the Howard consensus is over. You need to find a new pathway forward to re-energise centre-right politics. You need something new. On the one hand, you have Hastie and Jacinta Price and others looking overseas, understandably looking at Trump and Farage and thinking that looks exciting, that's creating a buzz. There is energy there. I find it understandable that some want to go down that path. On the other side, you have people like Arthur Sinodinos, Amanda Vanstone pushing back against that and saying we need to revert back to our core ideas. But their arguments sometimes feel hollow and beige, and it's not clear what their alternative vision is that provides hope and energy. How do you make a compelling argument on the other side to Hastie and Price and say, this is the path forward, while still talking about ideas around culture, national identity, but doing it in a way that's palatable?
Yeah. I think this is a critical question, actually, because people say, you want the party to be more moderate or you want the party to be more conservative. I don't think the party needs to be more moderate nor conservative. I think it needs to be bigger liberal. And I'll explain what that means, because I did this in my campaign where we were proudly, assertively liberal in the sense of offering a vision about where we wanted to go and why we wanted to go there. And that includes being assertive about who we are, not just a political movement, but what we actually want for the country. That's the point of having a vision. And I think that's what's frankly been missing for a long time, and certainly in the last parliament, because you get around debates around things like migration, and we get in this debate about, well, now we're going to get a debate about numbers. Well, actually, what Liberals should want from new Australians is unity, integration and loyalty. The numbers obviously do matter in a technical sense, but the extent to which we can do things proportionally should be based on, can we successfully integrate people for their interests and ours, I need to be clear, whether new Australians are going to be loyal to our country, and you go to any citizenship ceremony and it's very clear that that's what we expect of new Australians. And, of course, that they're going to become full participants in the Australian way of life. And I said this in my kind of first speech to the Parliament. I think one of the biggest challenges we have now is we don't have a story for our country that new Australians can integrate into. When I was growing up, the way the history of our country was taught was kind of from 1788 onwards and until kind of 1988, which was, make it great in 88. And then you can kind of tell my age and pedigree. But what seems now is we're kind of taught a pre-1788 version, then we kind of skip to 1958 and miss the bit in between. That's a bit simplistic, but that's kind of how it feels, at least to me. Whereas actually, if you want a culturally confident nation, and I do, a united nation, and I do, it doesn't much matter. And Menzies, by the way, the founder of my party, was very clear on this. Bring yourselves, bring out every part of your personality and your history and your culture, your race, your ethnicity. It doesn't matter. But make a meaningful contribution, because what people want is people going to make an investment, and we should be selling that story about people being massive contributors to our country.
You want to go?
Well,
sorry.
So you talked before about the liberal energy and the passionately selling liberal values. So this is what you're talking about, sort of passionately, proactively making this kind of a case in the context of, say, a debate about immigration, as opposed to talking about so-called mass migration, which is a phrase I use very cautiously because it's, it's parroting a certain sort of ideological agenda. Is this the way that you should be talking about immigration? Should you also be selling the benefits of immigration? Because particularly to the large constituency of migrants or people with non-English speaking backgrounds that the Liberal Party is kind of lost.
Well, I look at new Australians and I say, firstly, we keep saying we want to be a party of aspiration.
Yeah.
Right. So you can't be a party of aspiration unless you're on the side of the aspiring. So you're on the side of the young and new Australians always. You want an open society so they can get ahead. Anyone who has come to this country has already said, I am going to chance my hand, to risk my past, to throw myself into the great vortex of a new unknown world. And that is an energy and enthusiasm for which it must be channeled. And then, of course, you're naturally more likely to go on and make a greater contribution. So, I'm somebody who looks at new Australians and go, yep, I'm not keen on people giving easy pathways to welfare pathways. I am very keen on giving pathways to get people to channel that energy, to build small businesses, to be economic contributors, to be successful participants in our society. And absolutely, that is what we should be seeking to aspire to, because that is the lived reality of what it means, I believe, to be a Liberal. It's that spark of aspiration, which you've already demonstrated by taking that great risk of coming here.
Just quickly, you're a bit of a unicorn in Parliament and in the Liberal Party because you won back a Teal seat and all the others are kind of gone and they don't look like they're coming back anytime soon. What is your advice, or what is your sort of, the guiding principle if the Liberal Party wants to win back those inner metropolitan seats that have just abandoned them?
Hope.
Yeah.
It sounds trite, but it
does sound a little trite.
What more
is.
Specifically, do you need to focus more on the economy? Do you need to talk about immigration? Do you need to, make a strong commitment to net zero? What is it that those voters want that you gave them?
So what I think voters want is they want someone who they can trust.
Yeah.
Who's obviously invested in the community, but that they can trust, because I think what the Teals do more than anything else is they trade on trust, and I think they've abused that trust, but they'll obviously disagree with me on that. But when you get elected on a platform of doing things like saying, you're going to scrap fossil fuel subsidies and climate change is the most important thing to you, then you vote for $3 billion of new ones, I think it's absurd that you can then say trust is your central thesis. But I think, yes, they want us to focus on the economy, but I think what those sort of tealish communities want is I actually think they want us to be bigger liberals. I don't think
big liberal energy.
Big liberal energy, because they're by their nature, they're aspirational communities. They're people who have often done well, but what they actually want is they want a better future for their kids.
Yep.
And they also want a better future for the rest of the country. They actually feel a greater sense of responsibility for the rest of the country. I always talk about Goldstein when I say if the rest of the country was more like Goldstein, we'd be a better nation. Now, yes, of course, I'm obviously very fond of the community that elected me to Parliament.
Controversial.
But I actually believe it, because it's a community of people who care for each other, who take responsibility. There is not just big liberal energy, but there is big small business and aspiration energy. And the more we instill that across the rest of the country, the more you have people who stand on their own 2 feet. And not just that, they turn around to others and help them stand onto their own 2 feet too. And if liberalism has many dimensions to it, but if anything, it is about that sort of mutual dependency and support that we give to each other, because that's the strength of our country. It doesn't come from kind of Canberra down. It comes from families, communities supporting each other and fellow citizens.
I'm really interested in your comments there on New Australians, because you could easily have been substituted Tony Abbott into your seat making similar arguments. It reminded me of his line, Team Australia, not Hotel Australia, without using terms like that. But to me, you are not someone who would share the view that some of your colleagues like Andrew Bragg and others repeatedly say, which is we can't engage in culture wars. You're interested in those same questions of culture. You believe in the one flag argument that Andrew Hastie believes in. You're very keen on integration, which is a contentious topic among some on the left and probably some in your party. Why have moderates, I know you don't like to call yourself a moderate, but you're on the left of the party. Why have you guys seemingly ceded ground on all of these questions around culture and national identity to the right of your party? Why are you not engaged in the fight publicly on these matters? Not just you, but the moderates in your party. Why are you seen to be scared to talk about these issues? How do you win back that argument?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm afraid of these arguments at all. I've come onto your podcast and
but that's the perception. Moderates don't fight.
What Paul and I were talking about was this. The right wingers are able to take up so much space and so much public attention with this stuff, and they get a lot of oxygen. But we don't always hear moderates or left wingers such as yourself come out.
This is where I'm going to take umbrage.
How do you identify?
I think there'd be a lot of people who would find it very challenging, not just me, to call me a left winger.
Left of the party.
But you don't like being called a moderate. Tell us what you like being called.
Well, no, because this is, and I made this point before, is that I don't believe the party should be more moderate or conservative. If anything, call me a big liberal. I'm happy to take that moniker.
Big liberal. Okay.
Big liberal.
The big liberals within the party don't seem to be so good at taking the fight up to the Conservatives and articulating their arguments forcefully in public and creating attention the way that Andrew Hastie and Jacinta Price have recently.
Well, I think one of the challenges of a big liberal is that there's so many different battle lines that are drawn. I want to fight on and stand up for and fight for Australians on the economy, on social inclusion, because sitting behind issues of culture is social inclusion. I believe very strongly in a socially liberal society and a respectful society, and sitting behind that, you actually have to have a culturally inclusive and respectful society as well. So I think, I don't know why others may not choose to prosecute these arguments, but I don't think I've ever been afraid to. Even some of the debates, I don't know how some of my colleagues perceive me, but I don't think most of them would say that I'm afraid of a fight. I think most of them would say that I'm quite happy to, but you've always got to pick your battles.
Yeah. On a more personal note, Tim, as you mentioned before, you sat out the last term of Parliament.
I'm not sure that was voluntary, but anyway.
Not voluntarily. What did you learn in that time?
Sure.
Was it a time of reflection for you? Was it a humbling time? What did you sort of glean in terms of observations sitting on the outside looking in?
So it would be wrong to say it wasn't a humbling time. It has to be, because I made a very conscious decision. My husband gave me very good advice, and then I chose to take it, which is you've got to look at this as a gift. Now, he probably saw it more as a gift, as an opportunity to move on from politics, and instead we spent 3 years in purgatory as I insatiably calculated my way back in. But it was a gift because you got to reflect on the government, the party, yourself, the community, where it was at, what led to their decision, their behaviour. But there was also a lot of other more mundane and prosaic things like campaign and campaign structure. And so I'm the first to say that I'm a better politician for it. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I spent a lot of time thinking about those things and ruminating. But I think actually one of the things that I really came back with was a sense of perspective, which is you have great privilege for 3 years, and it's very much a 3-year time frame, and you go for contract renewal and whatever it is, so be it. And that you've just got to be yourself. And I don't think I was ever not myself, but I'm not going to always say that I was my best self.
Right.
Or that you were sometimes thinking about moves and steps ahead rather than actually saying, actually, I've got a job to do. I'm very proud of the community that I represented, and obviously I'm extremely proud. I'm incredibly privileged to have had their trust again. But that I'm in this to do great things for our community and our country. How chips will land, so be it. And I don't spend waking hours thinking about or overcomplicating or overthinking things now because I just look at it and think what an enormous privilege it is that I've had.
We spoke when you decided to run again in Goldstein after a period of
you can break the trust if you want. The
silence. It was on the record.
No, I know. But
it was a good chat we had. But on the record, you said at the time that you acknowledged that there was a perception of you as someone who was sometimes arrogant, sometimes went about things in a way that was polarising and annoyed people. How have you changed interpersonally in the way you deal with colleagues or the way you deal with your electorate since then? Do you feel like a different kind of character?
No, I think actually it's slightly different, which is I don't think people know me. And I think because I've sort of spent most of my adult life in public life, which is a bit odd actually when you think about it.
It's a strange way to live.
It is a strange way to live, but all the way back to when I was president of the student union many, many years ago. Now I'm expecting everyone to remember that or to observe that. But sort of since about 25, I've actually been in different capacities in modest ways in public life. And people build up caricatures of who you are. And I don't think most people kind of knew who I was. And so I think they built these caricatures. I don't think all of them were always flattering. And then some people also, I think, took advantage of that. And so what I've tried to be, obviously had a chance to reintroduce myself, but I'm trying to be much more very clearly tell my story through as much as possible about who I am from, whether it's, thanks for giving me the chance to do it, Paul, talking about all the ways since, having a job since age 11 and that, I have worked very hard for everything I've got. And, I think there are a lot of people who enjoyed watching me be slapped down in 2022 and gave a lot of people a lot of satisfaction.
Why do you think this is? Your view is that there's a misconception of you as someone who's highly privileged?
Yeah, I do think there is that because, and I'm not trying to, I don't have a log cabin story either. I'm not pretending that. But I think people misunderstand. My dad mowed lawns. My mum worked
for
in
a living?
pubs. Yeah.
And mum owned pubs?
My mum worked in pubs. And they managed pubs when I was younger. And I started my first paper route at age 11. I was a waiter through most of my teenage years. And so I'm not suggesting in any way, shape or form that I had a hard life, but at the same time, the second part of my childhood was a complete disaster over crisis of confidence about my sexuality. I go into a lot more detail, but it's, all I've done is I've just seized life and gone partly because of that crux at the second part of my childhood over the crisis of confidence of my sexuality. I've always had this, I don't know how you put it, but almost kind of fear that I'm only ever moments away from perhaps life not going the way I want to. And so you just throw yourself in it with the level of confidence that probably throws people. But it's just naturally who I am, and I'm just not kind of afraid. But I think people find that pretty off-putting. So I guess I'm just now I think people enjoyed watching me be slapped down, but I think equally most people thought, well, from his background, what they assumed, he's never going to get up from that. And it's been interesting watching some Labor members of Parliament where I think they oddly have this strange kind of regard for people who pull themselves back up because they know a lot of people in that situation. And I've noticed even their dynamic change towards me as a person because they've watched it and they've gone like, jeepers, you're actually not what we thought.
So you've earned a little bit of respect there.
Well, amongst some people, I'm not saying everybody.
Tim, we've so enjoyed having you, and I'm particularly excited that you are a fellow. You also had a paper round at age 11 because I had one too.
Did you?
And I apologise to anyone who never got their copy of the
How many did you used
Times.
to carry though? That's the thing.
God.
It's
my mother
terrifying.
it was terrible. Like I was the worst paper deliverer girl. My bike wasn't big enough. The North Shore Times really should never have employed me for $2 a week or whatever it was I got.
$2? That's expensive for that.
No, that was what I was getting paid.
Oh, that's what you getting paid.
Or thereabouts.
I think I was about
slave
4
labour
or something.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think I was getting penalty
we should have
rates or
unionised
super
him.
or anything. Well,
He would have busted the union.
that's right.
no, I would have ended up leading the union.
That's right.
You fundamentally misunderstand me,
Could have
Paul.
gone so differently for you.
Well, I was a union leader at university, of
There
course.
There you go. Tim, we've loved getting to know you a little bit more on this podcast. We'd love to have you on again with your big liberal energy. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you.